Today we're talking all about goals and the science of goal setting and achieving your goals. There's a tremendous amount of information on the internet and in books and so forth about how to set goals and assess your progress towards goals and update your goals and so forth. In fact, there's so many programs out there that include so many different acronyms that it can be a little bit overwhelming. Today's conversation about goals is going to be quite a bit different. Indeed, we are going to talk about setting goals. We are also going to talk about how to assess progress towards goals. And we are going to talk about goal execution. We're going to do all of this in the context of neuroscience, because it turns out that there are not hundreds or dozens or even several neural circuits in your brain that control goal setting and movement toward your goals. There is one. And we are going to establish several, in fact, 4 specific protocols that you can use for goal setting, goal assessment, and goal execution in an ongoing basis, regardless of what your personal goals happen to be. So we talked about neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change in response to experience. In fact, neuroplasticity underlies all forms of learning, whether or not it's language learning or learning music or math or a physical skill. All forms of learning involve the reorganization of connections in the nervous system, the brain and spinal cord and body. One of the key principles of neuroplasticity is this notion of making errors as a good thing toward neuroplasticity. This is a little bit counterintuitive, but what the scientific literature tells us is that whenever we're trying to learn something new, if we make an error, we know it feels frustrating, but that state of frustration actually cues up particular brain areas to be more alert so that on subsequent attempts to learn that thing, we have a heightened level of focus and a higher probability of learning the new skill, regardless of what that skill is. And I've talked about encouraging people to embrace errors or pursue errors, not as their own end goal, but errors as an entry point for making the brain more plastic. And if you think about it, it really makes sense. Why would the brain change at all if it's performing everything perfectly? When you make errors, well, in the immediate seconds and minutes after those errors, you are in a better position to learn. A common question I get, however, is what should be the rate of errors, which is really just a way of saying how hard should the given task be that you're trying to learn or perform. And it turns out there's an answer. The 85% rule for optimal learn shows is that when trying to learn something new, you want to make the difficulty of what you're trying to learn such that you're getting things right about 85% of the time, that you're making errors about 15% of the time. It really points specifically to some protocols that we can implement, because people always say, okay, you want to set a high goal. You want to try and achieve something that's really lofty, but you don't want to make the goal so lofty that you don't make any progress at all. In fact, I would argue that the visual system and harnessing your visual attention to a narrow point is going to be the most effective way to get your brain and body into a mode of action to pursue whatever goal it is you're trying to pursue. That practice is in stark contrast to multitasking, where by definition, your attention is moving from place to place to place, right? I mentioned that multitasking can be effective in getting your system into somewhat of an increased level of activation so that you can pursue a more focused goal. But the visual attention to a particular point is going to be the most effective way to bring your system into a state of readiness and action for goal pursuit. There's another really interesting way that you can leverage your visual system toward long-term goals. The Balcetis Lab has also done some really interesting experiments looking at people's ability to set and stick to long-term goals. And the long-term goal that they looked at was one related to saving money for later in life. This is something that a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people have a hard time investing money or saving money for later in life simply because as human beings, we vary in the extent to which we worry about what's going to happen later. There's also a phenomenon of so-called delayed discounting. Delayed discounting is the fact that goals become less rewarding when they exist further out in the future. Okay, you may have experienced this walking past a donut shop. I love donuts. I love the smell of them. I love the taste of them. I try to eat them because I'm told they're not that good for me, and indeed, I don't think they are. I occasionally cave and I eat one or many, but in general, I try not to cave to the immediately rewarding properties of the smell and the taste of the donut. What we know is that if you smell a donut or you smell a wonderful piece of food, in the immediate term, it brings your level of focus, your mental focus, to the immediate phase, and it feels very rewarding. Like if you had it now, it would just be so good. But if you actually extend that reward out to tomorrow or the next day, you think, today happens to be a Saturday, but, on Tuesday morning, I'm going to get a donut. Whereas the kinds of goals that work when you place them out into the longer term and can create a heightened sense of motivation tend to be things that are much more rewarding to us. So delayed discounting simply says that the further out in time that a given goal is, the less effective that reward will be in motivating one's behavior. And indeed, you see this with saving money for retirement. You see this with all sorts of long-term investment. An experiment where they looked at people's tendency to save money for later in life. But the groups that they created in this study were really interesting. They had one group imagine what it would be like to be 30 or 40 years older, and then to invest a certain amount of money according to whatever it is they thought that they would need. And they measured the amount that they had set aside and saved for later in life. The other group actually viewed photos of themselves. So in reward that's intermittent and random is the most effective reward schedule we know. But the problem is always, how do we keep our cognition in line with the long-term goal while also being focused on these more immediate goals? And so this particular practice that I call space-time bridging, but we could give it a different name, but this behavior, or this practice rather, is teaching us to use our visual system and thereby our cognitive system and thereby our reward systems to orient to different locations in space and therefore different locations in time. And that is the essence of goal-directed behavior. That is the essence of setting a goal. It's about thinking about what you want. Then it's about setting milestones that are intermediate to that goal. Then it's about assessing whether or not you're reaching those milestones. And then it's, of course, about updating your goals if you need to update your goal. When we focus on an external point, we are in a process of exteroception. It's the focus on the extrapersonal space, not the peripersonal space. So when we focus on something, say a line on the wall for 30 to 60 seconds or at our computer for 30 to 60 seconds and just look at it and then move into any kind of action, whether or not it's work action or physical action, we are at its very core, we are engaging in this pursuit of extrapersonal space. We are placing our focus outside our body, and therefore we are placing the brain into goal pursuit. Mumley Balcetis has done really nice work on this. They've done is they've had people focus their visual attention on a goal line of some sort, and then to engage in some sort of behavior that requires a lot of effort. They always include a control group where people have to go through the same physical effort or mental effort, but they don't focus their attention just on one location. When people have to focus their attention on one location, like a goal line, they are much more effective in reaching those goals, and they achieve them with the perception that they expended less effort. So this particular study involves physical exercise, although as I mentioned before, they've done similar studies looking at cognitive type work. And what they did is they had a group of people exercise wearing 15-pound ankle weights, and they had to basically move a certain distance or run a certain distance to reach a goal line. One group was focused on the goal line, visually focused on the goal line. The other group was not told to visually focus on the goal line. And what they found was that the group that focused on the goal line was able to achieve reaching that goal with 17% less effort. They measured effort, and it got there 23% quicker. That's a remarkable difference, right? One group is simply looking at the goal line. The other group is not told to look at the goal line. Simply by looking at the goal line does something to the psychology and physiology of these people that allows them to move forward with less perceived effort and to do it more quickly. And in this case, they're focused on the goal line, but in a few moments, we'll talk about how one can use updating of goal lines, so incremental goal lines, starting with an intermediate goal and then extending the goal line further and further. Just by changing where a person looks, they change their perceived effort and their ability to do something more effectively, more quickly than a group that is not deliberately focusing their visual attention on one location. Well, it turns out it has a very specific underlying physiological reason, and that has to do with changes in our so-called autonomic nervous system, the aspects of our nervous system that prepare us for readiness and action or that prepare us for resting and relaxing.